Hey, I'm ZSH Plays. Welcome back at last to the Alpine Mountain Zoo. This episode has been a long time in the making, and there's a very good reason for that. We are doing a lot of building today. We're starting a brand new area, the centerpiece of which is the Alpine house. It'll sit in the middle of a forest and contains habitats for Alpine Ibex, European badger, salamanders, newts, and alpine butterflies, and we're going to get all of that built in this episode. This is where the new area is going to be, right at the foot of this mountain. We've got a lot of work to do, so let's get building. I mentioned in the last episode that the Alpine area was one of the two original areas that inspired me to start this zoo, so I'm really excited to get into it. The main inspiration for it comes from the Alpine Zoo Innsbruck in Austria. There's a building there called, I have to be careful how I say this on YouTube, but Fuchs, Dachs und Freunde, which is Fox, Badger and Friends in English. I saw a picture of it kind of looming out of a forest on Zoo Chat a long time ago, and it's exactly the kind of big brutalist construction that we like on this channel, and I knew I wanted to do a version of it at some point, and today's the day. Now, I literally saw one photo of a bit of the building in the middle of a forest. I purposefully haven't done any other research on it. I have no idea what the rest of the building looks like. I have no idea what's in it apart from the clues in the name, and I don't know how it works. I just really liked the shape at the front, and I thought let's do something based on that. So it's going to be a mainly circular construction on 3 different levels, which sits in the middle of the forest, and the way it's kind of gradually revealed as you walk through the forest towards it is one of my favorite things about it. The way our building is going to work is that on your way into the building, there's an outdoor habitat for European badger, and there's also viewing into that habitat on the inside of the building. Behind the building and extending up the mountain that you can see here is a habitat for Alpine Ibex, and you'll be able to stand at the bottom of their mountain and see them outdoors. But from the top floor of this building, you'll be able to get an eye-level view of them when they're up on the mountain, because their habitat is going to extend quite some way up the mountain that we have on this map. And then finally, inside the building, there's also going to be a walkthrough for alpine butterflies and exhibits for fire salamander and crested newt. That's the plan. I said there was a lot of building to do today, and we're just finishing the basic shape of the building here. So we've got rounded ends, both sides of the building, and now we're going to put in the top floor. So the building's going to have 3 floors, and I want 2 of them to be accessible to the Planet Zoo guests, which means we need paths going in a slope up the side of the building here, a proper path at the top of the building for them to use, and then obviously one on the ground floor as well. Ignore this wooden path here, this is just for the guests to stand on. We'll cover this up with some concrete or tarmac later on. I'm just making sure that everything's going to be at the right height. And there we go, that's the basic shape of the building. It could do with some walls though. We'll get those in a bit later. I want to start getting the floor in on the ground level to make sure that this is going to work. It's slightly raised off the ground, so we've got a ramp going up through where the entrance doors are going to be. And then this entire building is pretty much built with the mud pillar technique to get all these circular walls in. We'll use it again to get a floor in here. We'll sink this down so it covers up that path, and then we'll raise it up and copy it to make a ceiling as well. And then for the side walls, we're going to use the brutalist technique that we use quite a lot of having alternate rows of the plaster trim to create texture on the side of the building. This technique is simple but effective, and we don't need to go too crazy with the sides of this building or the back of this building because it's all going to be covered up with forest, but the front of the building will certainly be visible, so let's do some work on that. We'll work on the doors first. We're going to use the glass doors, and then we'll replace the big plaster panels with smaller ones so that we can get the doors flush to the wall and you can see through the glass. And once we've finished filling all of that in, then we'll get a design on the front as well using some more of the plaster trim, and we'll just have a kind of Art Deco almost effect on here, which I think will look really striking. And then we'll move up to the roof and cover up that path with some of the rustic floor panels, which we're going to just recolor slightly to get them to fit in a bit better with the surroundings. And then finally, for the basics of this building, we'll get a skin on the inside of the walls so that we can recolor those and make them look painted rather than just the raw concrete. We'll have a black trim at the bottom and then white or green for the rest of it. And then it's on to the exhibits. So we're going to have newts and salamanders in little exhibits here. We are very short on European exhibit animals in this game, so that choice is sort of made for us. And I want to keep these fairly simple, basically embracing what the game gives us. Although a lot of the reptile and amphibian houses I've been to recently have some pretty hefty enclosures in them now. Some of them are a lot bigger than the Planet Zoo exhibit boxes. As always, it's a shame they're square, but size-wise, it's starting to look like Frontier were ahead of the curve there. We'll also put the walkthrough exhibit in for the butterflies. We've got 2 species of butterflies that can be found in the Alps. I think both the European peacock and the swallowtail make it up to the Alps sometimes, so that's cool. We'll have both of those in there. I'm just putting a ramp in here to get the guests from the entrance up to the main floor of the building, just using plaster panels to get this looking a lot smoother than it would do if we just had the paths there. We'll put a bit of decoration in the middle of the room. There are so few decent statues for these European animals or signs, because the Europe pack was back in the bad old days of crazy comedy signs in a different style for each pack. But there's a decent, I think it's a reward statue for the Ibex, which we can use. So we'll put that in there. And then we'll move on to decorating the butterfly walkthrough. The way this is going to work is I've got the walkthrough in there with that sort of a straight path that you have to have. And then at the end, putting in a waterfall, a load of rock work and plants. And we're going to kind of curve the path round at the end and remove the far end of the butterfly exhibit and the door that's there by default, and then put a new door in so it looks like the butterfly exhibit is in an L shape. Just makes it much more attractive, and we can use plaster panels to cover up the path in the exhibit and join that in nicely with all the rest of the paths. We'll use some piles of rock, the stacked rocks and the river rocks that we use so often. Doing a good job for us again there. We'll hide a second waterfall in as well, which we're going to completely surround with rocks. So we've got one big, impressive waterfall, and then one much calmer, smaller waterfall, just to add another extra kind of texture into that area. I've rotated the waterfall round in the opposite direction because you get a much slower flow of water that way. And we'll copy some grasses and things like that down in here as well, so you can't see where the walkthrough exhibit ends and the new part begins. Add in a few other upside down plants and things like that, some of these conservation lanterns, and then we'll make a nice little sign like the kind that you might see in a butterfly house, telling people about both the species of butterfly that you can see in here. This is literally just the grasslands pole and the smallest billboard, but it works really nicely. And that's the butterflies pretty much done. We can move up to the top floor and just start joining this on nicely to the ground floor with some more plants and bits of concrete, and then we can move on to the European badger. We're going to have a big viewing window on the inside for people to see into the badger habitat, and a second smaller viewing window for them to see the badger's indoor area. So we need to get the terrain outside the building up to a good viewing height here, and then we can slope it down to where the path begins so that people can see them from both inside and outside the building. We'll curve some glass around here to provide viewing windows. This also throws some light into the building, which is great because with the roof being accessible to the guests, we can't have a skylight or anything like that. There we go, that's starting to look nice already. Let's start the outside part of the habitat. This little part of the building here will be the badger's indoor area. So we're going to put one of the little entrance tunnels that we built for the honey badger in here. And this is actually a really good demonstration of how much better the hitboxes have got in this game, because even though the European badger is a similar size to the honey badger can fit through here perfectly. And later on I discovered this needs to be about 4 times bigger for the European badger to fit through it, but we'll have that sorted out before the end. What we're going to do now is sort out the terrain. So like I say, we'll have the terrain sloping up from the path in front of the building up to the level that it's at on the indoor viewing window, and then we'll put the barriers in. So we're going to have another glass viewing window on the outside, and then the rest of it I'm going to use these log walls, which I very rarely use. They've got a really nice texture on the wall part, but then I don't really like the round wooden posts. They're very unusual, so I'm going to replace those with some square wooden posts, just so it looks a bit more like something you'd actually see in a zoo. And most of the back wall will be covered up with foliage anyway, you won't really see much of those. And while we finish those off, let's just talk about the badger, because this is the first habitat for the European badger we have ever built on the channel. And there's a good reason for that. They are very rarely held in zoos, primarily because they combine being nocturnal with living underground, which is really not good for visibility. So how often you'd actually see the badgers in this habitat, I don't know. But we do have a burrow cam so that guests can see them if they are in their burrows. We're going to build a little kind of waterfall / stream that runs through the habitat. I thought something small and subtle like this would be a real high point in the habitat. Not something we do very often, so I thought it would be cool to give that a go. And we're going to use the special effects pieces for this rather than the big waterfall pieces, so we can get it a lot more subtle. So we'll use the mid waterfall pieces to create some rushing water. some of which we can cover up with rocks so it's not 5 meters wide. And then we'll use some of the waterfall bottom pieces as well to create the kind of splashes where the water would end up. And then we'll just use rocks to create a kind of pathway for the water to go through, so we end up with something that looks like a little artificial river for them. Not sure badgers are huge fans of water, to be honest, so it's not really for their enrichment, it's more for the guest enrichment to have something that looks really nice in this habitat. Now, while we finish off the waterfall, I'm just going to take this opportunity to apologise for how long it took to get this episode out. I decided early on in this build that with the Alpine house providing views into the badger and the Ibex habitats, it didn't really make sense to do an episode where I just built the main building, because animal-wise, it only contains 3 exhibits, all of which we have built many times before on this channel. With the lack of European animals that we have, it's basically the exact same lineup as Belmont Zoo. So I really wanted to get both the habitats built as well, so that the building kind of made sense, and the views from the viewing windows on the ground floor and the roof actually made sense, and there was something to look at. But obviously building 2 habitats as well as the building took a very long time. But hopefully you like it and you think it's worthwhile when we see the finished result at the end. What we're doing here is extending the null barriers on the badger's indoor area, because I want to get a burrow in there, and it can't be as close to the barriers as I want it to be. So because they're invisible, we can just make them bigger. That's not a problem. We'll put the burrow in, and then we're going to surround it with some stalactites to make a kind of rock pile effect. We'll drop some enrichment items in for the badgers around the habitat. They won't use this log, it's too small, but I just really like the way it looks. Add in some dead trees and a few more alpine kind of shrubs. We'll put in the burrow cam that I mentioned. Always fun using these. And that's the badger done. We'll do a little bit more decorating on the interior of this building using some decals. Get some plants and trees and mountain designs on the wall. With these walls being curved, it's tricky to get these in. If you rotate them in the right way, sometimes you have to use multiple copies of them and they look good. Almost time for our final habitat, but before that, we have some new arrivals in the zoo. Let's check them out. The nilgai have had a pair of whatever baby nilgais are called. Foals, calves, let's call them young. They are very cute. Love the background to this habitat, but it's time for the Ibex. We've built habitats before for Ibex, Dall sheep, and Markhor, and every time we have to build a giant fake mountain out of rocks. In this habitat, for the first time, we have a real mountain, or, well, the mountain on a Planet Zoo map anyway, so we're going to take full advantage of that. What we're going to do is build the habitat up into this mountain. I just have some simple but quite tall fences at the back to keep our Ibex where we want them to. And I'm going to try and use as few rocks as possible so we get a really unique look with all the rock textures that you can only get on this map. The forest that surrounds this entire area will be built off camera because it's a lot of just placing the same trees over and over again. But I thought I'd show you the pathing so you can see how it kind of winds past the building. You've got a loop there that takes you up to the habitat. We'll make this fence look a bit nicer as well. We're going to rotate a wood piece on top of here so it's at a more interesting angle. Place a bit of plaster at the bottom of the fence, and then we can just copy that along to make these fences a bit more unique. And for the first time ever building for any kind of caprid, we won't be using the goat mountain. Even though it's one of my favourite enrichment items, it is way out of scale for this habitat. With this massive mountain, that enrichment item looks kind of silly on its own. The only way to make it look good would be to cover the entire mountain in fake rocks, which would then defeat the entire point of this habitat. So we won't be using that, but the Ibex can climb all the way to the top of this habitat here. We'll see them up on those rocks later on. I've covered the ground in these randomly rotated Oceanian rocks, and we're going to sink those down so they just poke through the ground a little bit and provide us with an interesting texture. And then we'll get rid of most of the grass so we get a slightly more alpine look in here. Drop a few dead trees and other bits of foliage in, and that's the Ibex habitat done. All we need to do now is tidy up the entrance to the building and add the building's name. This is one of Ricey's fonts. I think it might be one of the first Planet Zoo fonts ever made, actually, seeing as it's made out of the electrical switches. But if you rotate it properly and sink it in exactly, it still looks really good. That's the first letter done. I'll do the rest of it off camera, along with the forest that I mentioned. This is the arrangement of trees that we'll be using to do all of that. But it is time to check out the Alpine house. I love how this emerges out of the forest, exactly as we designed. Let's go inside. Some really nice light and shadows coming through the badger habitat as well. And here is the first European badger we've ever seen on the channel. Despite living in England, I've never seen a live badger, sadly. This is the closest I've got. We've got the salamanders and the newts on the opposite side of the badger viewing window. And then here is the butterfly walkthrough. It's quite refreshing seeing it with the two more alpine butterflies and having it full of tropical butterflies that we normally have. And up to the roof, there's a little photo display there, just to kind of fill up some of that space. The guests don't wander around it very much. And then here is the Ibex habitat. I'm really pleased with this. Those unique textures on the rock give it a really interesting look. And the fact that the Ibex can traverse it all is great as well. This is where we started today, or about 3 weeks ago to be honest, and this is where we are now. That's a lot of the Alpine Mountain Zoo filled in. Thank you so much for watching as always. Thank you especially to those of you who joined the Explorers Club. I'll be back as soon as possible with the next part of the Alpine area with 2 more animals very rarely seen on the channel.